Airplane pilot Ken Bamford read Rapunzel in Control. Ken, what did you like best?
I liked the comparison of, how should I say, this book was basically put together to educate young people on the history of aviation and especially combat aviation by making it a high school program to engage in mock combat with model aircraft. There is another program that's available that I myself have been involved in at one time when I was in high school called the Civil Air Patrol. It's a national program, to prepare young high school students for potential military service in the Air Force. And it was an excellent program, as I recall. The aircraft were real surplus military aircraft trainers or ambulance aircraft such as L-4s, L-5s, and T-34s, which were a trainer aircraft. The L stands for liaison, and the T stands for trainer, of course. No actual combat aircraft in the Civil Air Patrol that I know of, anyway. And many of the aircraft in that category include research aircraft, spotter aircraft, like the Bell X-1 depicted in the novel, and the AT-6, also in the novel. AT meaning advanced trainer, and X meaning experimental. I liked the comparison, and it reminded me of the Civil Air Patrol, which I loved being in when I was in high school.
What planes in the story, Rapunzel in Control, were you most interested in?
Well, every pilot's favorite airplane is the P-51 Mustang, and I have to say that was in there, along with a number of other of our top fighters and some top fighters of the oppositions as well. Some more advanced than ours, some less advanced than ours. It sort of gave you a pretty broad picture of the various types that were used, mostly in World War II. Some of them were after the war. And it was interesting because I know a little bit about the P-51's development. It started off as something that was underpowered, underarmed, with poor visibility and limited range. And throughout the war and the development during the war, which was rapid, it became our air superiority aircraft of the war. And other aircraft never got their chance to evolve like that. So that was a very special aircraft to me. And each of these aircraft that were combat aircraft in that conflict have interesting backgrounds in development. Being involved in aviation technology, I was interested in looking into that as well.
You're an airplane mechanic. In the story, the high school students build these airplanes in what when we were younger would have been called a shop class. Schools don't have that anymore. Did you like that aspect, that they're building these planes?
Yeah, but it must have been an awful heartbreaker to get shot down after spending all your time in the shop to build one of these things. I'd be upset.
Researching for the movie and the book, I attended a lot of the large scale model RC airplane air shows, and I remember seeing just beautiful, meticulously crafted large scale model planes, be a nice fighter like a P-40, and see it crash and have someone say to me, well, that was $80,000.
Yeah, and as I mentioned to you, this in reality, an operation like this in a high school would be financially impractical. Yet I was surprised when you told me it. There's just as much money spent on a high school football team.
When the story was written originally, the immersive technology was extremely expensive. In the movie, it's mentioned that one of the remote cockpits costs $85,000, and that would have been about right when the movie was made. The movie preceded the novel. This is an adaptation. And that technology has changed so much that those costs would come way down. Also, at the time when this was written, these large scale model aircraft were built, most of them from scratch. And today, a lot of these scale model planes, the big ones, are prefabricated. You can buy a lot of the parts, and so the planes themselves are a lot less expensive. So yeah, you're right. It would have, in 2008, cost about as much for a school to have an aviation combat program like this, a fully immersive remote control combat program, as the football team's budget. But today, it would be expensive, but much less so.
Well, I can imagine that it would be a project that everybody in high school would want to get involved in. And I sure would have. Heck, I used to do mock air combat in the small civilian aircraft that we had in the Civil Air Patrol. We would fly along, and we'd take a roll of toilet paper, undo the end of it, and throw it out of the aircraft at about 2,000 feet, and it would unroll, and whoever flew back and forth chopping it up, and the winner would be the one who chopped it up the most.
You did that in Rhode Island. Right?
Yeah, in Rhode Island, and when I did it, I was in high school. But I grew up next to an airport, so that was nothing abnormal in my point of view. Nothing's abnormal when you're a kid.
And being an aircraft mechanic later,
Yeah,
and traveling, you've been to Oshkosh.
many times.
Many times. You've seen the historic aircraft that are mentioned in this story, Rapunzel in Control.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you go to Oshkosh, which is in the middle of July, every year in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, it's an air show that's the largest in the world. It lasts for a week, and all the air combat aircraft are there. It's amazing.
And if you don't want to drive that far, you just recently went to Reading, Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
and saw the aerodrome gathering there over the 4th of July.
yeah.
What planes from the story did you see in Reading, Pennsylvania?
Well, that's every June 6th, D-Day, every year in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
And it's pretty amazing. It is a World War II air show. It's advertised that way. There are jump planes. There are numerous C-47s with actual 101st Airborne jumpers with period regalia and parachutes that jump out of these things for your amazement. That's how they used to go into combat. They have the fighters such as the P-51, the Focke-Wulf, and the Me-262, real flying aircraft. They were there, and you have a different encampments for the different participating countries, I should say. You have an American encampment, a British encampment, a German encampment, a Soviet encampment, and even had a small Japanese encampment. It was pretty amazing. And the larger aircraft there would be a B-29, B-25 Mitchell. And you can go on rides in these things if you want to. They're not cheap because they burn a lot of gas in those days, but it is quite amazing. More people should know about it, and it is quite the event, I have to say.
And if you're further south, if you can't get to Oshkosh, and even Pennsylvania's a drive for you, if you're much further south, there is the Titusville Warbirds Museum in Florida on the East Coast, right near Cape Canaveral, which you are planning to go to.
Yes, I am.
They have several of these aircraft, the World War II fighters. They've got a lot more, all through the entire history of aviation. And this museum holds the distinction of being the home for privately owned planes, they're all flyable. So you'll see
The real deal. The museum at Titusville, where all the aircraft are privately owned and operated, is quite amazing because it costs a significant amount of money per flying hour to operate these antique warbirds. You just can't go and buy parts for them anymore. They have to be specially made in machine shops to keep the aircraft flying. It's been said that all things considered, insurance, if you can get it, gas, and maintenance per hour for a P-51 Mustang is over $3,000 an hour flying time. Quite amazing. Yet people pay this willingly just to keep these aircraft flying as a piece of our history.
you have flown a lot of planes, but you also flew around the world. Tell listeners some of the planes you've flown and about the trip around the world.
That's a lot. I've been flying since I was 15. I got my student license at 16 and my private at 17. And I've been flying ever since, on and off. The first aircraft I flew were the L-4 that I mentioned in the Civil Air Patrol, which is just the military version of the Piper J3 Cub, and a few others in that time period, mostly civilian aircraft. The aircraft I flew around the world was actually a light twin-engine aircraft, and that was in 1987, and that itself is, that was quite an adventure, and an expensive one. And I have flown fighter aircraft as well, biggest and fastest of which was the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom. I flew that as a cameraman for the news media. The pilots that I went up with knew that I was a pilot, so they let me put about 2.5 hours on it. What a machine. And the flight around the world was a very carefully planned operation. Took 2 months to complete the flight, and it's the only way to see the world if you survive it, which I did. And we went east to west in our direction around the world. This is just the first example. Reason being was so we'd always have our sun at our backs to help with forward visibility and VFR conditions. And the longest leg happened to be Oakland, California to Honolulu, 2,100 miles. And the plane, with all its extra tanks, only had a range of 2,400 miles. So we had to be fairly accurate and take every advantage that we could, such as a tailwind, which is prevalent in June in the latitudes that Oakland and the Hawaiian Islands are on. So we always had a 6 to 9 knot tailwind. You had to give yourself every advantage possible to make it. Turns out it wasn't hard to get to at all. You just had to keep going west until you saw a pile of cumulus clouds on the horizon. And only cumulus clouds, well, I should say, in the ocean environment, cumulus clouds only form over islands. So 500 miles out, we could see these clouds. And in the same light, if you tune in the automatic direction finder, which is an old instrument, you'll tune it into Maui 550 AM, and it'll point directly to the station, just like it did for the Japanese pilots at Pearl Harbor, and it takes you right there. So that was a very exciting leg of the flight. And all the other legs after that have their own stories. I almost landed on a log in the middle of the runway at Singapore Seletar Airport. That's a military airport. And as we went over the knoll on the runway, rolling out after landing, we saw this log in the middle of the runway. So we veered to the left to avoid it on the rollout, and the log got up and walked to our left. It was a giant iguana in the middle of the runway sunning itself on our landing roll. Always something like that. Always something like that. You have to be ready for this stuff, And that all comes with perpetual training in emergency procedures, which military pilots do all the time. And civilian pilots sometimes don't realize that they have to do it too, because eventually something will go wrong and you simply have to let your training take over. But it's a very important thing when you're in a three-dimensional role, like aviation, as opposed to driving a car. Car driving is only a two-dimensional road. If something goes wrong, you just roll over to the side of the road. Not so in aviation.
A program like the one described in the novel, with fully immersive cockpits, could be a good training background. It's very similar to the modern training simulators.
When you're in the cockpit and you hear the wind rushing by and the engine running always the same way it should be, nothing quite takes place of that, because if you make a mistake, you just can't turn the machine off and get up out of your seat. I didn't meet anybody who actually ever got shot down over there, except I did meet Chuck Yeager one time. He autographed his book for me, and I think he definitely got shot down over Europe and in his Mustang. A few others, my flight instructor who flew A-1 Sky Raiders in Vietnam, he was trying to tell me in his constant drumming of emergency procedures that there are no emergency procedures that get your attention better than lead. And he says, lead really eats your lunch. By that, I mean enemy fire. I don't know if he ever had to bail out or anything of that nature, but I did have one friend who was helicopters. He spent 3 tours in Vietnam as a side door gunner crew chief, which, depending upon who you listen to, have the highest death rate in helicopters, or they're the ones that always get thrown free of the crash. I think he was probably right, because he had gotten shot down 3 times. Twice he was the only one to walk away from the crash. And he said the reason why he survived is because he had, number one, body armor on, and when the helicopter crashed, he always got thrown free into a nice soft rice paddy. In a Corsair, the engine is very different from the one in the Mustang.
And I knew a Corsair pilot.
Did you? Yeah. Well,
I was going through my memories of who I'd met that flew these things, and I knew a Corsair pilot.
The Corsair had an air-cooled radial engine, and radial engines, though they had the highest drag ratio, they had the best power-to-weight ratio because they were air-cooled, whereas the V12 Merlin engine, which was water-cooled, and that's the kind of engine that was in the Mustang, it had a lower drag ratio, but it was a more vulnerable engine. If the radiator took a round, the engine would last about a minute to a minute and a half before it would seize up at the power range you'd run it at in combat. Whereas you never had to worry about that with a radial engine. The radial engines, you could shoot a cylinder off them sometimes and they would still run, spraying oil everywhere, but they'd run long enough to get you home. A very tough engine. Therefore, the aircraft with radial engines were used at lower level combat, ground air-to-air and air-to-ground. They both were, but they really didn't like to use the Mustangs air-to-ground because of enemy fire from the ground.
Was it the R2800?
Yes, it's the R2800. That was used in many of the different fighters.
It was in the P-47, I believe, and I've got a story. I knew Mary Fike. I met her at a Civil Air Patrol gathering, in fact, and she tested the engines during World War II. And she was out in the desert, and they would test them to destruction. And they got the first R-2800, and she ran it at top speed and just ran it and wouldn't break. So she took the oil out of it and drained the oil while it was running, and it didn't stop. And she said she did all kinds of minor, plausible problems that would happen to try to break the engine, and it wouldn't. And she let it run, and I do not remember how long she told me, but it was a long time.
I think it ran without oil for something like a day and a half before it finally gave up the ghost.
She had a wonderful story about the R-2800. Well, speaking of that, whenever any pilots get together and talk about the old warbirds, they'll ask, what plane would you want to have been in? So what plane would you want to have been flying in that era? Yeah, I think you said the 51 earlier.
Yeah, the 51 is every pilot's favorite aircraft because it looks so sexy. In fact, at air shows, if there's a military demonstration team there, usually the Blue Angels, they come over, these young guys come over and look at these World War II fighters that their forefathers flew, and the thing that scares them the most are the propellers. They can't imagine what it's like to be flying a machine with such big, sharp clubs out there. They call the props clubs. They can't imagine what it's like to be flying something like that.
My choice would have been the P-47, the latest model, the last model of the war.
Yeah.
And you know why?
Indestructible.
That's right. I understand they just head-on fights with the Germans, and the bullets kept coming, but they couldn't get to the pilot. So,
it had unbelievable armor. It also had more firepower than any fighter we had out there. Most fighters have 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. The P-47 had 4 in each wing, a total of 8. That's some significant firepower. If you fly your plane in front of a P-47, it's all over.
Back to the radio control. I have invited you, and I hope sometime, maybe next summer, you can get to one of the large scale model RC aircraft events. In my opinion, and there are several, they're all over the world. In my opinion, the best in all the world is Warbirds over Delaware. Check your internet for Warbirds over Delaware. It's at Lum's Pond. And the hotels fill up, and lots of pilots and participants and spectators will rent a place to stay at Lum's Pond Campground, which I've been at twice, and it's surprisingly nice.
Well, I'll look forward to that. Do you think they'll have any Ukrainian drones there next year?
Those are small and mean. These are going to be big old giant antiques. Some of the planes you'll see at Warbirds over Delaware have 24-foot wingspans.
Wow. Okay, so
and all handmade. There are phenomenal things to see, and I wanted to ask Ken, you've read Rapunzel In Control. Now, the movie from which this was written, the movie is called SCRAMBLE, and we're no longer selling the DVDs. We've still got some, but we took down the buy button on the SCRAMBLE website. We have plans for SCRAMBLE in the future, but in the meantime, if people want to enjoy this world of fully immersive, high school, remote control, historic aircraft, air combat, they'll have to read the book Rapunzel In Control, which actually, that's the title story. The book is actually 5 separate radio control aviation stories. And you get quite a mix there as we go through the history of aviation with Cold War planes. And it ends with an almost futuristic look into quadcopters, helicopters, and cave exploration. But today we're talking about Rapunzel in Control, and it's set in high schools. And Ken, give me an endorsement here. You think it's a good story?
I do think it's a good story. I like the concept, because in high school, this kind of historic aviation, the only thing I had in reference to it was Snoopy and the Red Baron in the Sunday newspaper. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you for doing this recording. We'll put this up where people can hear it. The book is Rapunzel in Control. It's by Jody Raleigh, and it's available at Amazon. Thank you so much, Ken.
You're welcome. Had a good time. Bye-bye.